We're on Yud Zayin Amud Beis, right near the top, 4 lines from the top. Amrav Yehuda Amarav. We had said before a requirement that the Dayanim in a Sanhedrin have to be able to speak all the languages so they can understand the Eidim. When the Eidim say testimony, they could hear it directly and not hear it through an interpreter. Amrav, Kol Ir She'ein Bo Shnayim L'Daver Echad L'Shmoya Ein Meshivim By Sanhedrin. Any city, he says the minimum amount of the Sanhedrin that you have to have at least 2 that speak the language and 1 that understands the language. Over Beitar have a shloisha. In Beta, they had 3 people who spoke all the languages. Of Biyavna Arba, at 4. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Kiva, B'Shimon HaTeimani, Don Lifneim, Rabbi Shimon HaTeimani, Don Lifneim, Shimon HaTimni. He had all these Rabbanim. Lezer, B'Shimon, Rabbi Kiva, and Shimon HaTimni was also a student of theirs, and he was sitting in front of them. Bekarka, sitting on the ground. Those were the 4 people who spoke all the languages. Meisvei, Shlishis Chachma. If you have 3, that's already considered Chachma. So, like Rashi says, a Sanhedrin that has 3 people that speak the 70 languages, that's kosher. Revius Ein L'Mayla, and 4. That's amazing. That's there's nothing better than that. But L'chayrit Shveran Yehuda Amarav, he said you had to have only 2, and he was saying you have to have 3 who speak all 70 languages. So there's a different price that says no, that 2 is the minimum and 3 is the exceptional. So L'meidin Lifnei Chachamim Levi Merebi. The Gemara is going to now explain what these different lashonos are that you find in the Gemara. You find a lashon of L'meidin Lifnei Chacham. This is someone who learns about the Chachamim. That's talking about Levi learned from Rebbe. Danin Lifnei Chachamim, Shimon ben Azai, v'Shimon ben Zayma. B'chanan ha-Mitzri, B'chananya ben Chachinoi, v'Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak masni chamisha. Shimon, v'Shimon. Before we had said Shimon ben Azai, v'Shimon ben Zayma, B'chanan ha-Mitzri, B'chananya ben Chachinoi, v'Rav Nachman bar. So he says he had 5. He had an extra one because he had an extra Shimon. We said 2 Shimons before. Then we say Shimon, Chanan v'Chananya. Rabbi, instead of 4. That's are referred to when we say Don and Lifnei Chacham. Rabbi Seinu Sheba Bavel, Rav Shmuel. That's talking about Rav Shmuel. Rabbi Seinu Sheba Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Abba. Dayane Goyla Karna is referring to Karna. Dayane Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Ami Veravasi. Dayane de Popadisa, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel. Dayane de Nahardoi, Rav Ada Bar Minyumi. Sabi the Surah, the elders of Surah, Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, that's referring to Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. Sabi the Pompadisa, Rav Yehuda, Rav Eina. The elders of Pompadisa are Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina. Charifi the Pompadisa, the sharp ones of Pompadisa, Eifa va'avimi, b'nei Rechava. Eifa and Avimi, the children of Rechava. Amuroi the Pompadisa, Rabba v'Rav Yosef. Amuroi the Nahardoi, Rav Chama Nahar Baloi, Rav Nachama from Nardo. Masnu is Rami bar Rebbe. Amri Beirav, Rav Huna. See, Amri Beirav, it's talking about Rav Huna. So that's the end of the list, I think. But you should bookmark this page. So now whenever it comes up throughout Shas, one of these lashonos, you'll see who it's talking about. This is whenever the Gemara uses these lashonos, that's who it's referring to. Yudzayin Amud Beis in Sanhedrin, if you have to look it up. In fact, the Gemara of Amar Rav Huna, we just said, the last thing we said is Amri Beirav is Rav Huna. Amar Rav Huna, Amri Beirav But we know that there are cases where the Gemara says, or Amr Huna says, Amri Beirav. He says B'Shem Beirav. So how could you say Amri Beirav refers to Rav Huna if he used that lashon to describe what someone else said? Ela Rav Hamnuna. So the Gemara says no. So it's not Rav Huna, it's Rav Hamnuna, and that's why Rav Huna said B'Shem Rav Hamnuna. Amri B'Marava Rav Yirmiyah. Amri B'Marava in the west is referring to Rav Yirmiyah Sholchu Mitam, what they sent from Bavel. Rav Yosef Bar Chanina. Mechko Allah B'Marava, when we say they laughed about it in Marava, Rabbi Lazar. How could you say Sholchu Mitam when it says they sent from Bavel? It's referring to Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. But we know that there are cases where the Gemara says Sholchu Mitam, and it was saying the message, what they said over B'Shem Bavel, was L'divrei Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, was saying over B'Shem Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. Elepach Sholchu Mitam Rabbi Lazar, Machol Marava Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. Einachan HaMishoch Mitam is Rabbi Lazar, and Mechko Olai Marava is Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. We continue. The Mishnah had said, "V'kama yehe be'ir v'yeruya l'Sanhedrin me'av esrim." So this was a machlokes back in the Mishnah. We're already on the second page in the Mishnah. V'kama yehe be'ir v'yeruya l'Sanhedrin. How many people are in the city that it justifies having the Sanhedrin? Me'av esrim, 120. The Gemara is going to say where we got the number of 120. Rabbi Nechemiah says you need 230 because there are 23 members of a Sanhedrin, and if you remember in Yisrael, there was one dayan for the smallest cohort that then had a judge. A shayvit was a 1 to 10. So you have 23 judges, one judge for every 10 people, so you have to have at least 230 people in the town. So where do we get this 120? What makes the cheshbon? Eser v'shloisha keneged Sanhedrin katana ushloish shura shel eser ushloisha. We're going to see there's a Mishnah later on that's going to say that there were, besides the Sanhedrin, there were 3 rows of alternate Sanhedrin, of alternate dayanim. So it was basically 4 times 23, which the Gemara says, Hari Tishim B'tarti. That comes out to 93. Yeah, 4 times, does that make sense? Not really. Tishim, but no, I'm sorry, 92. 23 times 4 is 22. Yeah, the Sanhedrin itself, 3 rows, 3 equivalent rows of 23 each to be prepared to step in. So that's 4 times 23 comes out to 92. Basar about Lon and Shalbeis HaKnesses, like we had back in Brachas. If you remember, every city has to have Asar about Lonim, which doesn't sound like it's not what it sounds like. It doesn't mean about Lonim the way we use the word. It means people that sit in the Beis HaKnesses. We don't want that any city, if you come into the Beis HaKnesses and it's empty, it doesn't have a minyan, it's not considered a chashuv city. A real city has to have 10 people sitting and learning in their Beis HaKnesses. So add that on, Hare Meyu Trey, that's 102. Ushnei Seifrim, you have to have 2 people, 2 court recorders to write what the Bezdin was, what their decisions were. So that's 104. Ushnei Chazonin, these like the 2 bailiffs who enforce what the dayan says. That's 106. Ushnei Bali Dinin, you have to have 2 parties. You can't have a whole bezdin and everyone's apportioned, and then there's no one to bring a case. So that's 100. I forgot what we're up to. I think it's 108. Ushnei Eidim, that's 110. Ushnei Zaymimim, any aid. If you would only have a precise number, right? If you only had 110, so you had Shnei Eidim. The Eidim come and say their Eidus. They're not going to be worried that maybe someone's going to be mazim them if they're lying. So you have to have the ability for them to be mezumim. And then you have Shnei Zaymim. Those Eidim Zaymimim, those who would come, you don't want them to be able to come and say that the original Eidim are Zaymimim without any fear that they themselves could be mezumim. So they have to be real potential zaymim. So that gets us to 114. So it's interesting, like when you think about it, when you hear this, you say, okay, so what's the end? Once you say you need two zaymim, and then you need two zaymim to be mazim them, to make them potential zaymim. So why don't you keep going? Well, how do you know that this new pair also maybe so should go indefinitely? But the truth is, you just need that these Edom that came, they have to be able to be potentially huzam, and those Edom have to also have to be viable Edom, because they're not, as you know, Edis shiata yachal azima, an Edis that's not capable of being huzam is not a real Ed. So you need to have Edom, you have to have Edom zaymim, and those Edom zaymim have to be kosher. But more than that, you don't need. That's all. That's how you get. So that's how we get to 114. Okay, but we're still not all the way there, right? We said we need 120. We're only up to 114. The Tanya, Kol yer she'ein ba asara dvarim halalu, ein talmid chacham r'shai l'adar b'seicha. The Sanhedrin l'chara has to be talmidei chachamim. So they're going to have these 10 things. Have to bezdin makan v'oinshin. You have to have a bezdin that can dispense justice. But kupa shel tzedakah, and you have to have a charity collection, nigvitz b'shnayim, and that is collected by two people. You have to have two gavayim whose job is to collect tzedakah. U'mischalekas b'shloisha, and we had this halacha also that a bezdin has to be distributed by shloisha in order to be confident that there's no chicanery going on. In its distribution, you have to have three. Ubeis HaKnesses, and you have to have a Beis HaKnesses, Ubeis HaMerchatz, and you have to have a bathhouse. It's not a Talmud Chacham, it's not Bakavidik for him to live in a place where he can't get washed. Ubeis HaKisei, I guess that means a restroom. Roifa, you need to have someone who heals, a uman, and a bloodletter, a lavler, and a scribe. Not the kind of not like we said before to write over the bezdin, but just to write tefillin and mezuzahs. What's ches? I don't know what the ches is. Someone to be melamed tinaika. So all of these things. So we said basically 5. You needed 5 for tzedakah, 2 to collect it, and 3 to distribute it. And all these other jobs, you're talking about we're having a jack of all trade to do all these things, to be the roifa and the uman and the lavler and the melamed tinaika. So that's how you get another 6, right? 2 plus 3 plus 1 is 6. Another thing that you need to have Talmidei Chachamim is you have to have minei pera. You have to have different types of fruit. A person needs to have menuchas hanefesh. You can't be a Talmud Chacham and live in a city with no beauty. It's an interesting concept, right? When your wife complains to you, she says we need to get the nicer wallpaper, and you say to her, what difference does it make? We could live just the same whatever color the wallpaper is. She'll point this Gemara that says a Talmud Chacham has to live in nice surroundings with different types of fruit trees to be miyashav his dat.
What are we doing in Brooklyn?
I have to tell you, I mean, I say it to myself every time I go away for Shabbos to my house in Tom's River. We have it's like on a cul-de-sac and there's nothing there. And we have big windows looking out over trees, and it's just so peaceful, and so you just feel like a different person. In the summer, if you go up to the mountains, you just went to the Poconos, right?
Yeah,
it's a different feeling. Yeah, I don't have a teretz. That's the best kasha anyone has asked since we started learning. So on the bottom of Zayin on the base, right, last line. So we said in the Mishnah, right? So we were just explaining the Mandamut says you need 120 dayanim, people living in a town, to have a Sanhedrin. Ibn Chaim says you need 230. And the Mishnah explained because he said you have to have 10 for each dayan. Like we said, you have to have the pasuk says, "Keneged sarei asaros." You have to have an officer for every 10 people. Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Masayim v'shivim v'sheva. You need to have, he says, you need to have 277. Where does Rabbi get this from? This is a third shita. Vatanya Rabbi Yoimeh Masayim Shivim Ushmaina. He said you need 278. Like Kasha Har Rabbi Yehuda Harabana. When it's going according to Rabbi Yehuda Harabana. So Rashi explains, the Gemara didn't explain why are we adding on. Rabbi Nechemiah said 23. And we're adding on, in addition to it, another two. We said 230. We're adding on either 47 or 48. So Zak Gemara, Zak Rashi, Masayim Ushloishin Krib Nechemiah, V'oid Mem Zayin, Shem Yischalku Bezdin. If Bezdin will split, Yud Aleph Mezakim, right? We're talking about a Bezdin of 23. Yud Aleph Mezakim, V'achar Asa, Mechayven, V'echad Oime Eini Yedei. And one says, I don't know. Yosifu Me'elu Mem Zayin, Ad Shivim. You can add on another 47. It says later, there's going to be a Gemara later on that on these circumstances, we had this din of Meisifin, that if someone is not able to make a decision, you add on two more. So the Gemara later on says that the amount of times you could do that, you could keep adding because they're unable to come to a decision, is up to Mem Zayin. And you're gonna have to keep doing it until there be 70. That means the total amount of the Bezdin of 23 that you have to add on that you can add on through this din of Meisifin, it can't ever exceed the amount of a Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is 70. According to the Rabbanan, is 71. So 70 minus 23 is 47. 71 minus 23 is 48. So that's how we get to 277 or 278. That means you have to have enough people in the town to be able to be moisef, to potentially be moisef on the Bezdin if necessary. And the maximum amount they could get to is 70 according to Rabbi Yehuda and 71 according to the Rabbanan. So therefore the town has to have 277 or 278. Tan Rabban. Samt aleim sorei alofim, sorei meis, sorei chamishim, sorei asaris. This is what we said the reason for Reb Nechemiah in the Mishnah was. You have to point over this is by Yisrael when we were pointing the shayftim. So you made shayftim over 1,000, shayftim one shayfit for 100, so you shayftim for 50, and shayftim for 10. Sorry alofim sheshmea. Sorry. These for sorry alofim you need 600 or 600,000 yidden, so you need 600. Sorry meis shisha alofim you need 6,000. Sorry meis. Sorry chamishim shnayim asar alef. The sorry chamishim you need 12,000. Sorry asaris shisha ribuya you need 60,000. Sorry asaris nimsu that in Israel shiva ribuya ushmayna alofim v'sheish meis. If you add that all up, the amount of dayanim was 70,000 and 78,600. And there's a whole cheshbon. Taisus asks the obvious question. Then, if you have to have this many dayanim, then that should take away from the 600. Like people who are dayanim should not be part of the cheshbon of that. There other people are dayanim over them. He says a cheshbon that I wasn't able to quite follow in the teretz. I guess some of the dayanim could also be judged over by other dayanim. Next mission. New parak. Kohen Gadol don v'danen oisai. A Kohen Gadol can be a judge, and he can be judged. Meidu meidin oisai. He can say edus, and you can say edus about him. This is going to be in contrast soon to a melech who is not judgeable. He's not like as our melech. Judge Mershan is now involved in this very question right now. Can you judge the head of state? Chalitz v'cholzin le'ishtay, he can do chalitza. If his brother dies and his wife is neifel yibam, he can be chalitza, and if the Kohen Gadol dies, his brothers can be chalitza his wife. Or miyabim lesishta, his brothers can be miyabim his wife if the Kohen Gadol dies. Aval hu eine miyabim, but a Kohen Gadol can't be miyabim for an obvious reason. Make sure who asab almana. His brother's wife is an almana. He's not allowed to marry her. Mace loy mace. If a Kohen Gadol has a karev who dies, he can't go following the mita. He has to follow from a distance where people can see him from the funeral procession, and he could see them, but then he has to hide himself. He has to keeping a distance, so he's separated. It's like when they go past out of sight, then he could go into the street that they were just in. So yeah, he can't. I'm saying when I say Megal, it doesn't mean he can Megal himself to them. He can go into the street after they're Mechasa themselves. So he has to keep a distance. And he could go in this manner, following at a distance until the Pesach Sharir, because the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to become Tameh, even to a Karev, unlike a regular Kohen. So he has to keep a distance so that he won't come to be Metama. This is Remeir. He doesn't come out of the base of Mikdash at all, the Kohen Gadol, when it's a mace like mace. The Torah says he can't go out of when someone dies in a Mikdash lo yetze, so therefore he can't go out of the Beis Hamikdash at all when there's a funeral, when there's a procession for his karev. When the Kohen Gadol goes to be Menachem Avel, derech kolam oivrim b'zeh achazeh. The way it works is when people they do this. I rather it was only once in my life, but people probably have seen it more than me. In the Beis HaKvaros, they have a lineup, right? And the Kohen Gadol goes in between. So that's what we talk about Shum Menachem. It doesn't mean like we go during the week to be Menachem Avel. But that Nichum, Acherim Derech Kolam. So everyone makes the Shura. Oivrim B'zeh Achazeh. They used to do it differently. That everyone passed by the Avel. We do it that the Avel passes in between everyone else. I think, right? You guys, I never did it. I just was once the subject of it when my father was nifter. But Hamamuna Mamtsu Beinoy LeBeina and the Kohen Gadol would be next after the behind the not directly next to the Menachem, and then after him was the rest of the When the Kohen Gadol himself is getting nechama, Ma'achrim me'acherim from others, Kol oimrim loy anu kaparascha. We will be the kapara for you. Who oimel hent is baruch ben hashamayim. She get a bracha ben hashamayim. Obviously, the Gemara is going to explain the reasons for this, why they have this special nusach. Ukshemavarchem oisay kol masuv ma'al haaretz when they give him the Sudas Havra, the Suda that's provided to him by others, the first Suda after a person loses is when they become an Avel. They're provided a meal, so then everyone else sits on the ground, and he sits on a chair. It's going to be a derech covered, right? Normally the Avel sits on the ground. In this case, they sit on the ground and he sits in the normal way. Hamelech loy. Now that's the end of a Kohen Gadol. Now we're going to move to a Kohen Gadol, a Melech. Hamelech loy don v'loy don, and I say, a Melech cannot be a judge and he cannot be judged. He's above the law. Loy meid v'loy meid, and I say, you can't be made about him, and he can't be called to say this. He can't be forced to say this. It's not bakavadik thing. Loy choylitz. He is not choylitz. He's not choylitz another woman. Because in the part of the process of, we're going to see later, but part of the process of chalitza is spitting on the ground. The one's going to say it's not a covet, and I think Rashi explains because they spit on the ground in front of the chalitz, and it's not covered for a melech. You can't be chalitz his wife, as the Mishnah is going to say in a minute. A melech's wife is not allowed to remarry, so there's no point in chalitza. She's not subject to Yibam. She's not subject to Chalitza, and she can't marry anyone. She is unfortunately an aguna, so the chalitza would be pointless. Loi miyabim, he can't be miyabim because he can't be miyabim. He can't be miyabim anisha. It's not pakavidik for him to be the one who carries his brother's name. He should always, the melech always has to be primary. Loi miyabim lishta, you can't be miyabim his wife, like we said before. The same thing as chaltzim because she's not allowed to remarry. He says, no, that what you said, he can't be chaylitz or miyabim. Those are mitzvahs, and the melech is not exact. If he does so, he gets a mitzvah. Amruloi ain't shaymanloi. He said, no, there's no such thing. He can't. The chacham disagree. We don't listen. He can't be miyabim or chaylitz. Like we said before, there is a din that one cannot marry his almana; she remains an aguna. Yehuda disagrees. He says it's true that generally a widow of a king can't remarry, but if there's a new melech, he can marry an almana. It's not a lack of covet for the melechs who died for his almana to marry a melech. We find David did this. He married Shaul's almana. We'll give to you the house of your lord, or meaning said to David about Shaul, that's Neshayadanecha, and the wives of Shaul, to take to you. Zaktimar, Kayin Gadol done. A Kayin Gadol can be done. Pshita. Why not? Why shouldn't a Kayin Gadol be able to judge? Zaktimar, done and Isa, it's trichle. We need it for done and Isa, that you could done him. In fact, the Mara Hanami Pshita, why should he be above the law? Why shouldn't he be able to be judged? So the Mara, no, because Eloi Dainin and Lei Iu Hechidayin. If he, the problem, the reason why we have to say that it's done in Isa is because maybe if he's not able to be judged, how could he be a judge? Why is that? The pasuk says, "V'kaishu," and this is the famous din of Reish Lakish. You have to first you have to judge yourself first before you can judge others. So, if the Kohen Gadol himself is not able to be judged, so he certainly cannot judge others. So, l'chayr it's pashat. If we say that the Kohen Gadol is able to judge others, he himself also must be able to be judged. You can't say some kind of svara that it's not bakavidik for him to be judged, because we already said that he's a dayan. So therefore, what do you have to say? Done and oisai, because that one follows from the other. If there's no done and oisai, then he can't be a dayan. So again, we're left to the question: why does the Mishnah have to tell you that he can be judged? Since we say about a melech that he can't judge and you can't judge him, Tananami Kayin Gadol don v'danan. It's just for symmetry that we say it, but Einachanami, it's not necessary to say don and oisai, because it follows from the fact that he could be done others. Kayin Gadol shaharag es hanefesh b'mezid nerag. Kayin Gadol kills someone on purpose, gets killed. B'shaygig gaili goes into galus. He's over an essay. He should be over an essay and lois essay. The Gemara is going to explain later on what that means. And he's a hedgel l'chol dvar. So Zaktim, b'mezid nereg. What do you have to say? B'mezid nereg pshita. So the Gemara answers. The Brisa answers. B'shaygig gaili etzricha. It's coming to tell you that even b'shaygig he goes into galus. What do you have to tell me that? Why shouldn't the Kohen Gadol be included in Galus? So no, that there's a reason. It's the way Galus works. If somebody who's sent to Galus for killing someone b'shaygig, he stays until the death of the Kohen Gadol who was in place at the time of that he killed someone. But this was a Kohen Gadol who killed someone. So there was no Kohen Gadol. So he's not going to be able to leave Galus when the Kohen Gadol dies, because there is no Kohen Gadol. He's the Kohen Gadol. When he dies, he's going to be leaving in a box. So Ema called the Islay Takant B'Chazara legally, the less late Takant B'Chazara loy legally. I might say, since he's not able to get out of Gullus, he also can't go to Gullus. That's none. Any Kohen Gadol who kills, he's not able to go out forever. So maybe Emaloi Ligli, Kamashmalans. That's what you have to. That's what the pasuk is telling you. Now, the way I understand this Gemara is that this is what our Mishnah is saying when it says Don and Oisai. It's coming to tell you this chiddush that the Kohen Gadol is subject to the din of Galus. But other Rishonim say that we still haven't gotten. The Parasham Iso said we still haven't gotten to the teretz. The teretz is still going to come later. Maybe so. We learn from the pasuk even a kohen gadol, and then the brisa there that we had just brought said over al essay val loisasei. So the more loisagdili over. What does it mean? He's over essay and loisasei. Harikamer im avav al essay val loisasei harehu lahedjit lechol dvarav. If he's over on an essay or on a loisasei, he's treated like a hedjit that he's going to be done with a bezin of shloisha. So the more pshita, why shouldn't he be done with a bezin of shloisha? I think Rafal, you asked this question: if a kohen gadol is done on maybe I don't know if it was you or Lucy maybe, that if a kohen gadol, we said a kohen gadol has to go in front of a Sanhedrin. What about dinei mamnes? So this is what this Gemara is saying, that a kohen gadol who is over on something that would normally be on dinei mamnes or on something alav that you get malchus according to the number that you only need a bezin of 3 for that. So like we said earlier in the first parak, that we're only down a kohen gadol and it's in front of the Sanhedrin. Dvarav shel gadol. That's referring to the kohen gadol. Ema kol dvarav shel gadol. Maybe everything, not just dinei nefashos that would normally be with a bezin of 23. You go to Sanhedrin, but maybe every case, if he gets a parking ticket, the kohen gadol has to go to the Sanhedrin gadol of 71. Kamash malan. Ve'ema chanami moy takanat miksiv divrei gadol. Hadavar hagadol doesn't say all the things. It says hadavar hagadol. Davar gadol mamash. So it means only a matter of capital punishment. So that this is what they say. This is finally the teretz of why our Mishnah said a kohen gadol danin. It means danin oisai with the same as everyone else in a bezin of shloisha. I mean, I actually think it could have been that the first part was the teretz, and you see there's the 2 dots before this. It's mashma that maybe the teretz was that it can be nigla just like anyone else. So we said the kohen gadol is done v'done naisai. You know what? Let's stop here. I think we're about to stop. Yeah. Okay. We'll stop over here, and we'll continue the lesson tomorrow.